Chewy.
And I'm Vanessa, and welcome to No
No,
Filters, No
no
Fears
fear.
podcast.
Yes.
Do
You
you
guys have
remember how, the travesty that was us saying the intro for a
Oh God.
while?
Why
It
are
was
we
just not, it was not the thing.
again? We started with travesty, like everything from just we're
From
not
the
talking about
tag
like
to everything. Yeah.
traumatizing moment. We don't no. Mm-mm, no.
It's okay. We're not there anymore. We're not in that space.
Okay.
We're better now.
We're better. Today's elephant is the level 4. Before we forget.
Yep. Level 4. For those of you who are new to watching, the elephants, our little pink elephants, are the elephants in the room. There are also trigger warnings letting people know that we are going to be talking about matters that might be difficult for them or difficult for them. So we invite you all to stay and watch throughout. But if something is more than you can handle emotionally in any episode, not this one in particular, feel free to tap out for a bit and come back when you're ready. Take care of you. But we are here to help share information and bring awareness to a lot of different topics, from health, mental health, to uh, just activism in general.
Yes. Everything included.
Everything included, and good times as well. And for those, we have like tinier elephants, 1 and 2s. We forewarn you, this season, when we were looking back, most of the season is level 4. We got a lot to talk about.
We got a lot to talk about and a lot of things to share with you. So get prepared for those level 4s. That's the average. So we're very excited about that, though.
Yeah.
We gotta sit on the uncomfortable, topics to be, to be better, to progress,
And
to
to grow.
obviously be comfortable with the
Yep.
uncomfortable. So
1,005%. So today we are going to be talking about accessibility. Access is key. Accessibility and awareness of the need for more accessibility and changing the rhetoric behind ableism, right?
yes, correct.
So you know how we start this. Should we do have a definition for accessibility?
Of course I do. Well, I found two different types of definition, so I would like to
Okay.
share both because I thought they were both interesting and unique on their own. So, accessibility is a practice of making your websites usable by as many people as possible. We traditionally think of this as being about people with disabilities, but the practice of making sites accessible also benefits other groups, such as those using mobile devices or those with slow network connections. So, obviously, we never think about the internet wise as well. So this is why I was thinking to sharing
No,
both.
it's a legal thing now. It is
Yes,
illegal if your website is not accessible for the hearing and visually impaired.
right. So then this one, that people can do what they need to do in a similar amount of time and effort as someone that does not have a disability. It means that people are empowered, can be independent, and will not be frustrated by something that is poorly designed or implemented. So accessibility,
So
everybody has access to it.
right. And it's so frustrating. Now, of course, my main experience is in the state of Florida, city of Miami. I feel like in other cities, we see a lot more work being done to make places accessible. I feel like here, we still need to get it the hell together.
Definitely.
I mean, it also is a law. It is a law that you need to, ramps, elevators, seating, parking, all of these things that make it just everybody should be able to have access to have this, to be able to enjoy similar experiences in life, and not just for like bars and fun times, for work as well.
Right.
Going to work, and then on top of the difficulty of like that everybody is annoyed at the idea of having to go to work, wake up early and the whole thing, on top of that you have to add a layer of difficulty to your day and trying to figure out how to maneuver your workspace because it was not created with your needs in mind.
Right. I mean, and granted, it's not like we're saying, but yeah, back to the point that my brain was trying to make is that we're just trying to, like, for us, remember how for our YouTube, we didn't realize that it wasn't accessible. And we were
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I need to put like the auto generated or like an actual language or like, so it could,
I remember
eventually
for a
upload
while,
it.
both of us were trying to figure out an app or something that would generate the captions for us.
Right, and how to do it. And we were really concerned about that because we were like, how far are we reaching the audience without us being accessible? And then I realized that on YouTube it has the auto caption, so who's ever not able to actually hear properly, they able to read it. So yeah, that was a concern of ours for a while, but I'm glad that we were able to actually figure out that we are able to, put caption, and it actually
Book captions.
helps.
I was, and just recently I saw that Instagram also created the caption through for the stories and things like that. That
Yes.
made me excited. Um, for example, I have a student. I talked to you about him before, I think, uh, especially when we started talking about this episode. This student of mine went through 1,050 surgeries for his eyesight, and what an amazing and boy he is. Like he's yummy, and I want to squish him, and he's so incredibly talented. But the other day, like, and he's been very outspoken about the need for accessibility for the visually impaired, because it's truly affected him. He's turned 21. He wants to be able to share and have these experiences. So he's very much on social media. So having these kind of developments that make it easier for him to be able to see what's going on social media and to share his own experience is really nice. But again, still a ways to go.
Just like when we were, that's the thing with us. Every time we're making a post, you're like, oh my God, are we able to read it ourselves? And I'm also, to those who don't know, I'm visually impaired on my right eye. I really can't see much from it at all. So when I'm looking at something, I'm like, I can't see that either. So if I can't see it, that means our general population might be able to see it either. So us having those contrast background for our post actually helps people too.
Yeah,
Oh, and like,
absolutely.
remember how there, when you put the description captions now on the actual body, so
Yeah,
when people are actually able to read it with the accessibility on their phone, it reads what's
it
being
reads
on
it
the
for them.
screen. I love that. I love that.
We hadn't. I found this. No, this is not. I will read it afterwards. But we had mentioned before, we had mentioned before ableism, right?
Yeah,
So I feel like you can't talk about one thing without talking about the other,
correct.
because so much of this idea that certain that we don't need to progress in certain ways comes from this idea of like, well, if it doesn't affect me, then why do I need to do it? Right?
Right, right.
The bubble that the certain communities will create for themselves. Like, okay, well, the majority is okay with this, but no. Right? And we also talked about what was it? Equity versus equality. At one
Equality,
point,
yes.
is that it also comes into play here, where it's like access should be granted to everyone. It has to do with that quote that you shared today about it, dignity. It affects the way people feel, and we're missing out. We're missing out on being able to share with people that there's nothing. I don't understand that there's nothing wrong. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing wrong with them. They're able to share. We're missing opportunities for friendships. We're missing opportunities for great innovative minds by not creating spaces where everyone can show up. I feel.
I mean, yes, and this is why slowly we've been trying to, make it accessible, all the information out there. And I feel, see, I'm the one, I use my accessibility on my phone. I use at least three of them since I obviously need them, like especially when reading some tiny fonts or something, and I use it. So having that on the phone, now that technology also obviously has evolved, is has been able to connect people, who are hard of hearing or deaf, to their loved ones as well. I've been seeing this commercial on like on the social media or on TV, however you want to say it, about a parent speaking to their child for the first time over the phone, and they're deaf, and it was just like because of the phone and the technology that has evolved. And that was really touching because they got to hear and like actually talk, over the phone. It's something simple, but they're not able to be in the same country or city together. So that was really like, yeah, that
And I
commercial.
mean, it kind of ties into our episode on, the invisible struggle on
Right.
chronic pain and chronic illnesses that may not be visible to the eye, right?
Exactly.
We talked about, I have cousins with MS, and they also require level accessibility. Sometimes they're able to walk just fine, and there's other days that it makes it really difficult. So having a crap ton of stairs and no other way into a building and to work or whatever makes it really difficult. So having those things in mind, that just because you know oh, but they look perfectly fine, right? What was it, that judgment that we talked about, the judgment that people make about the parking spaces? Oh,
Oh
they're
yeah.
fine, they're totally lying, they borrowed somebody's. You don't freaking know.
Yeah, that gets on my nerve when people are judging other people without knowing, and it's like, do you know why? No, you don't.
Okay.
So
So I do have a definition here for ableism: a system that places value on people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normality, intelligence, excellence, desirability, and productivity. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in anti-blackness, eugenics, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This form of systemic oppression leads people and society determining who is valuable and worthy based on a person's language, appearance, religion, and or their ability to satisfy, or produce, excel, and behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. We talk a lot about the collective conscious changing, right? And recognizing that we need to learn things outside of our own circles, whether it touches us or not, right? You don't have to be queer to learn about uh, the queer communities and what their struggle is. You don't have to be um, black to learn what that struggle is and how you can be better and help and be of support to that community. You don't have to be Latina. You don't have to be anything. You just have to be a
right.
human being who's interested in knowing things outside of themselves. We're not an island. And the more we separate ourselves from the things that are happening around us and to the people around us, we're just ignorant and closed off. And we don't want to be that.
But also empathy, and you know how I always say reading is essential. So do it.
With that being said, are we ready? Because I'm ready.
Oh, we're definitely ready. Oh, I cannot wait.
We have a special guest today, and I am very excited. So I've known this person for quite some time. We haven't been in touch in a while, but I definitely follow them on all their social media platforms that they pop up on, because they are very vocal about advocacy and about awareness for accessibility. And I'm so excited to have them here with us today. Please welcome Annie Segarra. Did I pronounce your last name
Hello.
correctly?
I think that's perfect.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Oh my goodness. I was listening to y'all and I was actually like trying to look back on my old YouTube videos and be like, when did I start captioning my YouTube videos? And I can't really pinpoint exactly. Not yet. I'm still scrolling. It's like I'm at the 6-year mark and I'm like, did I start captioning 6 years ago?
That's a ways to go back.
I know. I think at least 6 years ago. And that was like, I know for sure for me, it was inspired by my friend Ricky Pointer, who did like really huge campaigns about how YouTube was not accessible because people weren't captioning their videos. And even if YouTube had created like the auto captioning, like she created a really great campaign called No More Craptions, which like nicknaming the crappy auto captions as craptions. And like with a campaign like No More Craptions, trying to get people to not just rely on the automated captions on their videos,
because
but to actually
sometimes.
Yes.
Like Google Translate, it'll translate it will say what's not coming out of anyone's mouth.
Yeah. There's a bunch of problems with automated captions, and like and on YouTube right now, the automated captions also censor words in the captions that are not actually censored in the videos. So like in the YouTube video, if someone says the word shit and it's not bleeped out or anything, but it'll be censored in the caption. So like deaf people don't have access to the word that was actually used in the video. Like it's a little bizarre. It's a little infantilizing. I don't know. With stuff like that, I don't know if it's like super like intentionally ableist, like, oh, the deaf people cannot know that they said a bad word, so let's censor it. Or there's something other kind of bug going on there. But it's very possible it's either of those options.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
And you are a content creator, so I'm sure you've run into a lot of these kind of, because I feel it's not just the creators that are not writing captions or whatever. The ones that are aware also have the difficulty that the programs, if that's what they're called, don't exist to aid in this accessibility.
Yeah, creating accessibility is not always accessible to all creators. That's the irony of it, and it's been a really tough thing to try, because it's a nuanced conversation about like sometimes creating accessibility in your work is not accessible to the person creating it. A big example was like, so something I learned about years ago as well, along with captions for people who need audio access to things, is image descriptions and video descriptions for people who are visually impaired or blind. And that came about from like, you know, just having visually impaired friends. And I be remiss to like not mention this amazing TED Talk by Haben Girma, who is a blind and deaf lawyer. And she did an amazing TED Talk where like she described her experience in university where she did not have access to her lunch, like deciding what her lunch would be, because there was no accessible menu for her. There was no Braille menu. They said, we have a different menu every day, so we can't get you a Braille menu. She said, well, what you could do to make it accessible for me is just email it to me. Email me the menu every morning, so that way I can have my reader do that, so I can make a choice. And yeah, so that experience alone is a beautiful TED Talk if you get the chance to check it out, by Haben Girma, if you want to look it up. And it was her speech, and it was talking to a lot of blind and visually impaired friends who like, they're like, yeah, the internet is like one of the most inaccessible spaces, because like we do not have access to images, do not have access to visual videos half the time. The internet is very inaccessible in that way. And so one obstacle for me was like, I want to say about a decade ago, I was doing body image focused blogging because I was post recovery from an eating disorder. And so I became very passionate about positive body image and trying to kind of like use the momentum I felt post my recovery to hopefully help other people find a similar place and a similar comfort with their bodies as well. And so for a long time, I had a blog where people were invited to like post their photos and talk about their journey with their bodies. But then came along, you know, the knowledge that without image descriptions, that the content that I was creating was not accessible. But I hit like this awful block where I'm like, I cannot describe other people's bodies without the potential of like triggering them, especially on these journeys. And a lot of these people who are submitting these stories, they also are having some form of dysmorphia, or they're in their own body image kind of like recovery process or journey. And they can't, it's not a fair thing to ask them to describe their bodies either. So that kind of like made me kind of like ease out of that kind of content, just because I'm like, well, if I personally, for me, it's a very like deeply moral thing. I'm like, if I can't make what I'm doing accessible, I don't feel right producing it. Like I'd rather like not put something out than put something out that people feel excluded from due to a disability. And so that kind of like fell back, but it was also the right time for me to kind of like ease up on that, because I ended up finding like other journeys. Then I started on my own disability journey and diagnosis journey, because it was around that time where I started getting really sick and becoming like progressively more disabled, and went from like working 12-hour shifts as a hostess standing up to not being able to stand up for like more than 2 minutes at a time. So then when that happened, I had to put all my focus into figuring out what was going on with my body and finding what my diagnosis is, which like year-long journey, short, spoiler alert, it was Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I took quite a few years to figure that out, but mostly just to get it officially diagnosed, because on the way there, I did figure it out through the miracle that is the internet. So I basically spent a good chunk of that time telling doctors, hey, you should test me for this condition, and then being like, ha, you don't have that anyway. and just like laughing it off that I even like thought that I had it. But then, so Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it's a connective tissue disorder, meaning that like my connective tissue, my collagen, it's defective. And collagen is the protein that's all over your body. It's the glue that holds your body together. So when you have crappy glue, it's like you have a house that instead of concrete holding it together, it's got jelly holding it together. So all my internal organs and my joints and stuff are held together really cheaply, and that causes a lot of problems. This condition, there's like a few different types of it, and the most common type does not currently have a blood test for it. What you need in order for it to get diagnosed is for a doctor to be knowledgeable about it and clinically diagnose it. Like just check boxes off, like you have this symptom, you have this symptom, you have this symptom. Okay, this is what you have. So like that's kind of the only way you can get that diagnosed. But fortunately / unfortunately for me, I have a rarer type. So while in my city, there wasn't really a doctor knowledgeable enough to clinically diagnose me, I did find one who was willing to give me a genetic blood test. And fortunately / unfortunately, that blood test returned with a positive marker for classical type Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So if I didn't have a rarer type, I would probably still be stuck in some kind of limbo.
Trying to figure out what the diagnosis is.
Trying to get, well, yeah, I was actually talking about it today. Like a lot of people ask me, like, what for? Like, why work so hard to get this diagnosis? And prior to like learning more about it, this was kind of my first venture into the healthcare system in the United States. I was still kind of shocked that like when you're chronically ill, it's not like an episode of Dr. House where you go into a hospital and they like spend time on you and figure it out. Like they won't let you leave the hospital until they figure it out. No, they're willing to send your butt home. And if you don't have the money to see more doctors, sucks to be you. So that was all really tough. It was very expensive, very traumatizing journey. And I learned a lot about the healthcare system. And I thought, originally that like a diagnosis meant treatment and it meant getting better. But ultimately, this condition is one that like it's considered a rare disease, and so there's not a ton of like research on it. There's not a ton of money spent on that research because it's considered a rare condition. So a lot of it is, on our own, playing explorer and like venturing in uncharted territory and just trying to figure it out by ourselves. So I guess that was a big reason why it was important to me to try to get a diagnosis, because now like I know that there's a lot of like secondary conditions to it, and they're very expensive to get professionally diagnosed. And for me, I'm like, I know that I have this primary condition. I know that there's several secondary conditions to it. And I know that I have the symptoms for these secondary conditions, and that's enough for me. I'm not gonna shell out $2,000 for a test for each one of these like secondary things.
In of itself, the healthcare system is inaccessible.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we have a capitalist healthcare system where like it costs thousands of dollars for just one exam, right. and then sometimes in order to get diagnosis, you have to get several more exams. But like that, and like my empathy for my friends, because I guess as someone who like became more visibly disabled and more physically disabled as my life went on, because I used to just push myself when I was younger. Like I had my symptoms, but people would just like think of me as lazy and stuff. I remember even in college, there was like times where I would tell professors, hey, this scene and this rehearsal is like causing me pain. You're having me stand up for a really long time and I'm in a lot of pain. And a professor would be like, what do you mean? Why are you in pain? I'm like, and I didn't have the language for it. I was like, I don't know. I think my knees are crooked or something, but like my legs are in pain standing up here. And the professor would be like, your legs look fine to me. Keep standing there. so like things like that. And when I was in elementary school, I would push myself to run laps, but like so EDS also affects my blood vessels very intensely. And so the running, oh my God, swooshes your blood around in your body so much. Yeah. My face would turn like tomato red. I would be so out of breath, like my vision going because I'm like on the verge of passing out. And because like I wasn't a skinny child, they just like, dismissed that as like me being out of shape and like and like just needing to push myself harder. So like these things, I had symptoms and I pushed myself and that pushing probably wasn't a good idea, but that was my childhood with these symptoms and just kind of pushing myself until I couldn't anymore. And that was in my early 20s where I kind of lost my ability to walk. But I kind of have the experience, right, of like a sort of more abled style lifestyle, and then my like officially disabled, aka wheelchair user lifestyle. And it was eye-opening for me how, because I hadn't had wheelchair users in my life. I was kind of the first wheelchair user that I knew. And so it was eye-opening to like go to my favorite gay bar in the city and then realize, oh crap, my favorite gay bar in the city is up a flight of stairs and they don't have an elevator. So right. I can't get in there anymore. Because I'm ambulatory and I'm able to like walk a little bit, even though it's a mission for me. I used to, for a little while, try to be like, can I park my wheelchair at the bottom of the steps, and I'll use my cane to like climb up the stairs, and then I'll just like hang out there for the rest of the night until I finally come back down. And eventually that didn't work. Eventually, like I was met with like some hostility of like, no, we can't have your wheelchair down there and you have to move it. I remember like pleading with somebody and being like, if I go back down the stairs, I can't come back up. Like, I don't have the stamina to do this again. And they were just like, shrug. Like, you like, but which, like, I don't know, there's different elements to that conversation as well. Like, we could talk about like the ableist beauty standards of in gay nightlife. And that might have had something to do with it too. But that feeling of the exclusion that lack of accessibility causes is something that, because of my experiences, I personally deeply empathize with. And that's why I feel such a moral obligation to create accessible content, because the way that lack of accessibility made me feel in those times, I never want to be the source of that kind of pain for anybody else. Like, I don't want somebody to come across like a video or a photo and be like, I can't, I don't have access to this, and feel excluded because of my actions. So I do my best. And like I said, I'd rather like, and it kind of, as a content creator, makes me feel a little left behind sometimes, because I am a disabled creator, and like I don't always have the stamina to, and the energy and the cognitive ability to create like image descriptions or to type captions. Like right now, my hands are actually in finger splints because my hands are in so much pain. And when my hands are in so much pain, like typing out some captions or correcting some captions and stuff is very difficult. And I'd rather like not put out content if it's not accessible, which is probably another conversation to have, because I feel like that's really unfair to disabled community. I feel like there has to be some kind of ability to like provide like community support for things like that, like asking community members, can someone describe the image? Can someone provide a transcript or et cetera, for whoever is able to volunteer and create those things. I again, as a content creator, and probably under some other kind of personal trauma, really struggle with asking for help, really struggle with like being like, can somebody, I'm like, no. Probably my own internalized ableism, to be honest, is like the difficulty of asking for help. And when you're like a person living in the intersections, right? Like being like Latino and being queer and all these things, like there's so much internalized capitalism, which honestly equates to internalized ableism, about about strength and power, and like not letting people see you vulnerable, and hence not being able to ask for help when you need it. So I mean, do as I say, not as I do. I struggle with it. I struggle with it, but I know that it's the right thing. I know that we should be able to like outsource community support with stuff like that, because there's so many content creators who completely neglect disabled community, who completely neglect accessibility, and continuing to create content, no problem. And that really like is the source of a lot of erasure for the disability community on the internet. What if out of a moral obligation, disabled people who are creating things are like, well, I can't put out my own content, I can't tell my own stories because I cannot make my content accessible. But while that's a reality, definitely there's still a lot of people who are perfectly able to create accessibility, but just neglect to do it for whatever reason. I want to assume a lot of it is just ignorance. I want to assume that like a lot of people just like maybe don't know how to make an image description or don't know how to caption their videos. So and that's on the platforms to kind of really put that out there. I was really disappointed with TikTok, and I'm like, you're a brand new video platform. How did you even feel it was okay to start running without an in-app captioning service? Like, whatever year it came out, I was like, it's late enough. It's
seen
late
the
enough.
other ones and what they're missing.
Yeah, it's late enough in the timeline. There should be no video platforms that come out from here on out without captioning services inside the program. I think that was so ridiculous. I was really angry for a long time, and now they made one, and it's still not great. And what I have to say to that is, like, accessibility needs to be prioritized, especially when you're giant corporations and giant companies and people with the funding, right? Not like individuals who are producing individual style content on the internet, but you're a whole thing. You're a whole company with funding and money, and it should be a priority, because if you're gonna be big in that way, then there's no reason to exclude entire communities of people.
Right. And I had mentioned this before. It's a legal, it's like a legal commitment to have web pages and to have accessibility for any content on your pages or social media. So it's funny that these platforms are not providing this, right?
That's a big
all
one.
Anybody will get is a slap on the wrist. Not a
to be honest, that's
fine,
a big one.
What the fact that they're not,
that they have been, and they're capable of being sued for that, like being any kind of website that makes money, because that means that you are providing a service. That means that means that you're taxable, that you're making an income from the website that you're making, and you are discriminating against a part of the disability community. So that's being non-compliant with ADA, with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so there have been websites that have been sued for not being accessible. So I always thought that should be like, incentive enough. Like it's the law. No, as an activist, like, I struggle with, like, how on earth do you get ableists to listen? I'm like, it's against the law. You can hear my stories about empathy and how much it, like, emotionally sucks to be discriminated against and excluded in spaces that you're supposed to feel welcome in, especially, but any space at all. And there's just, I guess, like, gonna always be people that just, like, don't care. And that's something that, like, I've been struggling with recently is like, as an advocate, as an activist, as a content creator. And I guess, like, the mental health triggers of 2020 didn't help either, but like, the struggles of how it just creating content around accessibility and around, like, disability. Every day, more and more people are going to come into these conversations from a place of ignorance, and it's kind of hard to not be triggered by that, because living in an ableist society as a disabled person is traumatizing as heck. So, like, another example from just today was I was scrolling through TikTok, and there was a blind creator, and silly me decided to check the comments, and a lot of the comments were fetishizing her, saying, like, she doesn't even know how hot she is, and other comments saying, like, how, if she's blind, how can she read the comments? Like, we can say whatever we want down here. Like, and so that second one, right? That second one was like, if you're blind, how can you read the comments? I tried to have compassion for it and be like, okay, they weren't trying to be nasty. They just don't know. But it's kind of hard after you hear things like for the 500th time. And people just continue to come in with the same kind of one-on-one question.
Is just annoying.
Which I think you mentioned, like, especially like phones are one of the like biggest accessibility devices for people with visual impairments and people who are blind. And yeah, there's this accessibility modes on cell phones where it will audibly read it to you, or some folks who are reading Braille, they have a little plug-in, it's called the screen reader, and whatever text is displayed on the screen, it will like, I don't know if translate is the correct word, but it will turn it into Braille that is legible for a Braille reader. So it's kind of like a little translating device that someone can get Braille on. So there are different ways. It's just hard to kind of, it's a confrontation of how segregated we are. And that's the trigger. The trigger is like when you get met with like an ignorant question like that, it's a reminder of the system of oppression that you're existing in, and it's a reminder of how segregated we are. Because if we weren't so separated all the time as communities, as like whether you want to call them abled or non-disabled versus disabled, then I would assume that kind of ignorance like wouldn't happen, you know. And something that makes me very emotional is how it starts from like elementary school, where they separate like disabled kids and non-disabled kids, and it immediately creates this feeling in kids of like, oh, those kids are different. Oh, we should be separated from those kids. Oh, they're different from us. Oh, they are less than us, etc. And this separation begets so much ignorance, begets like kids just like not understanding neurodivergence, not understanding blind accessibility or deaf accessibility, or wheelchair accessibility, because sometimes even kids, just because they have physical disabilities, will get separated for sake of like accessible rooms. Not so much anymore, but like before the 1990s, the schools were lucky if you had a ramp. You did not have a legal right to access school. If you were a wheelchair user and the school near you was not accessible, did not have a ramp, sorry, sucks to be you, kid. You're gonna get homeschooled. Like that's pretty much the way it was. And it was just in 1990 that they created laws around that to make public spaces, including schools and businesses, accessible. And even though we have the law now, there's a lot of stuff that's illegal, but people still do it anyway. So that's including public spaces, businesses not being accessible. And it's not like health codes or anything where you have like a health code inspector who comes in to check. Like the only way that the law is implemented is if somebody who notices that it's not accessible and files a lawsuit. So the onus is on disabled people. The onus is on people to see if something is not accessible, and then the onus is on them to like get a lawyer and file a lawsuit against this public space. So there's a lot wrong. And that's why I spend like so much of my time and labor like talking about it, because I do believe that the internet is such a gift right now to be able to talk about these things. Like as much as we're talking about like how inaccessibility is equivalent to community segregation. And the internet is kind of like the one space where our communities can actually like hear one another and be present for one another and listen to one another's stories. So in doing that, I have seen, and it does make me slightly hopeful, that people are starting to engage more and learn more about the disability community, and that there's going to be less of tolerance to disability discrimination. There was like a joke somewhere that like disabled folks are the new marginalized group, and I'm like, okay, sure, but all like it's I mean it's a joke, but also it's like not a joke. Like I want that joke to like be transformed into truth, because I feel like, yes, in some activist circles and some feminist circles, there is a nice, decent spotlight on disability community right now. But it's disappointing to think that, yeah, it's only in like activist and feminist circles where like there's kind of like a spotlight. Like it's not a mainstream issue as far as like I can see, right? It's not something that people like the average person I'm going to come across and they're going to be knowledgeable about like disability culture or disability rights issues. And even like as a queer disabled person trying to like navigate like dating and talking to people, like it feels like it always has to be me in a teaching position and like constantly being like, yeah, this is disability culture and this is ableism and this is like the kind of ableism and exclusion and discrimination that I have to deal with on a daily basis. And it's just constantly like me teaching. And I feel like as long as I feel that way, that's how, that's the reminder, that's the trigger of like how everything is and that things haven't changed yet. You know what I mean? So,
So how does that conversation start for people that, you know, are used to having that ableist mentality or approach things in a way of like, oh, like it's not just a given? How do they start that conversation with someone that is from the disabled community to have them be included and to be aware of how they can be more inclusive and create environments where every, you know, like make those also around them aware that they need to make the space?
Yeah. My first recommendation is always to like seek out disabled creators who like have been talking the talk and walking the walk, figuratively speaking, for many years on the internet. Especially on YouTube, there's just like I mentioned my friend Ricky Pointer with her No More Corruptions campaign and things like that. Like if you make it an intention to diversify like your social media feeds, like your Twitter feeds and your Instagram feeds, you're like, if there's no disabled people, and especially like disabled writers, disabled educators, disabled activists, and I put a focus on that because I feel like if you solely have disabled entertainers, then that often becomes inspiration porn. And inspiration porn, for those who don't know, is like when you kind of consume a disabled person's narrative solely to be inspired by them and solely because they're disabled. Like it's enough for you that they have a disability and that they exist, and you're like, oh, that's so inspirational. Like they're so inspiring just for existing, which doesn't have to be in a content creation way. And there's absolutely no disrespect to disabled entertainers who are not doing any educational work or not doing any activism work. But I do question abled people who are solely interested in disabled people as entertainment, but not interested in becoming any kind of effective ally to the disability community. So that's something to like question within oneself. Like, do I like disabled entertainers? Fabulous, great. I'm glad that they're a part of your feed. Also, are you learning how to be an ally? Are you learning how to like create accessibility online? Are you learning about disability rights issues and not just using disabled people for your entertainment, but actively working on becoming a good ally to disabled people? So that's something that's like really important to me. And so there's a lot of those creators out there. Ricky Pointer is one of them. Haben Girma is another one. I can't even. My brain is gonna erupt if I like try to like make a list off the top of my head.
I was gonna say we're not opposed to you sharing a list with us so we can, and we'll post it up so that people can take a gander. I already sent Shuvi the Haben Girma TED Talk, so that we can share that with our
Oh,
This is
I
that's
I
you.
love that TED Talk so much. I also definitely have on my YouTube channel like a couple of videos of like I think like one was 20 disabled YouTubers, and then I think it did another one of like 10
Wow.
more disabled YouTubers.
I love it.
And they're so great. And I try to keep like my list like with like queer folks and disabled folks of color, and try to like because just like any other community, just like with the LGBT community and just etc. Like there is a difference between the most privileged of those communities and people living in the intersections. Those are very different experiences, and that's another thing to watch out for. Not just like consuming disabled people just for entertainment and not actually trying to be an ally, but if you only have like white cisgender straight disabled people on your feed too, it's like the disability community is a diverse community. I've had people literally like say to my friends like, you can't be disabled, you're black. Like that. There's no such thing as like black disabled people. And like yeah, that's the kind of stuff people will say on a daily basis. And the fact that somebody could say that again says that like their environment, their circle, and their internet feeds have a severe lack of diversity within them. So gosh, it's very unnerving. It like puts me down. But I do have hope with like conversations like this, that like there are people out there who want to do better, and there are people who are willing to work to be better allies and want to see a better future for all of us and a more inclusive and accessible future for all of us. Because I think you mentioned it as well earlier on, like accessibility is just, it's beneficial in numerous ways. Like first priority is equality for disabled community, but it's so overwhelmingly beneficial in a variety of ways. And sometimes I feel like I can't really, it's not a fair / it's kind of a biased opinion for me to have as a neurodivergent person. But as a neurodivergent person, I use both captions and audio description when I watch things, both. So because I can get like audio processing issues, and people can start to sound to me like the grown-ups in Charlie Brown, like like, and I can't understand anything, so I need captions. And oftentimes just because of like sometimes I get brain fog and like cognitive delay of some kind. So, and sometimes I just suck at like noticing details because things are moving too quickly. So especially on Netflix and now Apple TV, that's a new one for me. They have audio description, and so like things will be happening on the screen. There are times, this is also an eye thing, mild visual impairment that I have. Like I have a lot of difficulty seeing darkness and shadows in the darkness. And so like if I'm watching a movie and the screen is too dark, I'm like, I cannot make out anything that's happening in there. While other people can, but I'm like, I cannot understand what's happening on the screen. So audio description will tell me, this guy's hanging out under the public garbage can, and he is like sneaking around under it. And now he went and he hid inside the garbage can itself. I'm like, thank you, audio description, because I would not have seen any of that. And just as both a writer and as someone who's trying to create accessible content, audio description has also helped me like with vocabulary. Sometimes audio description will describe something on the screen, and I was like, oh, I did not know that was the word for that was the word for that action, or that was the word for that object. I've always seen that object, but I never knew what it was called. So it increases my vocabulary, and it helps me write better image descriptions when I'm writing image descriptions for like my photos and things on Instagram. So like that's enriching. Like that makes me feel like I gain something out of my day. I gain something out of my viewing experience. I'm not just like which is not bad to like lounge around and like watch something that doesn't require any real focus or attention.
And also
Like
with
that's great.
Also in connectivity,
Yeah.
because if you're watching it with someone and you wouldn't have been able to understand what you're seeing because you can't make it out or whatever, you're not sharing the same experience. So the conversation now is limited in what you but now you can talk about it. Did you see? Yeah. Well, no.
Yep.
You know, you now have this moment.
And usually I find it that I'm like, I feel like I'm a little biased. I've always talked about how like I love both captions and audio description when I'm watching something. And then like later on, it was just more clarified that I'm neurodivergent. I was like, oh, probably these are like things that I need for accessibility, to be honest. But other folks who maybe like have not identified with like neurodivergence or anything else also have appreciated like the benefits of these things, because even if they don't identify with being hard of hearing or deaf or audio processing or even any kind of visual impairment or anything or any other disability that requires audio description, they will come out similarly. They will come out and be like, oh my God, thank goodness for the caption, because I did not understand what that person was going to say. Thank goodness that the audio description said that, because I didn't see that thing. Like, so there's just so much to be gained in that way. And there's definitely ways to even talking about like physical accessibility, like wheelchair accessibility, etc. Like, it's just, again, another like beneficial way to just create like universal accessible design. Like, instead of having a bunch of stairs and like people who, again, maybe don't identify as disabled yet, don't know they have a disability or have undiagnosed disabilities that they may not be aware of, don't have to struggle so hard to climb up a staircase. Like, instead, like, have some escalators there, or instead have like a series of ramps up there, because everybody can use those, but not everybody can use a staircase. So there's just a lot to be gained from conversations of accessibility. And then if you want to, you could, this is like the last resort, last bullet point, is economically it's beneficial for folks. And as a creator, it's beneficial to you to make the content that you make accessible. As an organizer, and as a person who designs spaces, it's beneficial to create accessible spaces and use accessible spaces, so you can get more people in there, so you can get people buying more tickets to your thing. Right. If you're a content creator, you get more individuals consuming your content. Because if you didn't, you're excluding entire communities of people. So that's my final bullet point on that, is like, that's my last resort. Like, the fact that you're hurting people and you're going against the law, like, should be up there. But then the bottom of the list is like, also it benefits you to get more individuals consuming your content, to get more individuals into your space. Like, isn't that what you want? So hopefully, like, that is like the final like nail in the coffin of like, you should want to make your stuff accessible so that you know are more successful that way.
I feel like the narrative for so long has been that people need to fit into certain boxes in order for it to be monetized in some way. That it's been completely disregarded that these communities that you are ignoring and pushing aside and judging and not including very much are participants and you know, pay
and got money and got families, and we got families that probably want to come to the event with us, and that we want to like, and that we could possibly share your content with, and all these like elements about it. I don't know. Like I said, for me, it's a big moral obligation for me. It doesn't really have to be much else. I could have an audience of 2 people, and I'm like, let's make this. Let's make sure that this is accessible for the 2 people that are going to consume it. And I'm really glad that we're having this conversation about it. I hope that whoever is watching or listening or consuming this content in whatever way that's successful for them are considering whatever they create or whatever event they put on or whatever space they want to create to make it accessible to as many people as possible, and to research about accessibility and what kind of tools and what kind of things are required to make things accessible for other people.
I learned so much. Thank you so much for your input, for everything, your knowledge. And I see, this is why I brought the whole captions thing, because I started telling Vanessa, I'm like, we need to, image description. Obviously, I didn't know how to do it, but, like I said, reading is essential. So I went to go learn that. So now I'm able to, provide more. But like you said, it does become hard sometimes, especially for me, since I have psoriasis, arthritis, so my hands are usually in pain like 99% of the time sometimes. So it does become difficult to type in text. Thank God there's voice tags that could do like
absolutely
that. So I'm able to talk to it and then fix minor details. So that's also helpful. But thank you so much.
Yeah, and if I can, I'll give you like one tip that like I give to most folks who are just learning how to do like image descriptions. It doesn't. So first, people like ask like, where do I put it? Do I put it like right under the image? That's preferred, but I put it at the bottom of like whatever caption I write, and just like write image description, or some folks just write ID : and then you describe it as though like imagine yourself with in the room with somebody who, for whatever reason, can't have their eyes on your phone, and you say like, I'm looking at this picture, it's of this person, and they're wearing this, and they're so like let me pull up an example. Like I have this box in front of me, and like the image description, it is a Black, feminine, slender person wearing a red cardigan and a white dress, surrounded by bushes of red flowers, and she's holding up a wand, and that is your image description. And that like allows you to like understand what it is that I'm looking at. And then more so there's text on the image, so you would say, well, like what the text says for accessibility, and be like, this is Modern Witch Tarot Deck by Lisa Sterl. Yeah. I didn't want to do like an sponsored thing, but I'm like, let's just go for it. and say what the text says. But yeah, you describe like what the text is in an image, and what the image is of, and like a very like simple descriptive way. For someone who's like what we just did right now is a good example. Like, you're not looking at the same thing that I'm looking at, so let me tell you what it is.
Right.
And that is essentially how you, like, the goal of an image description when you put it in your Instagram photos.
I'm excited to start doing this even for my personal Instagram. I've not done this at all.
Yeah,
and
I started on my personal as well a couple of last year, I believe. But yeah, it is so much helpful, especially I didn't even realize how much I needed it, because I do watch TV with the audio description and everything, you name it. So, or I keep saying TV, but you know what I mean, the platform or whatever.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, obviously, until that much older, like you stated yourself, why I needed it. And then I realized, I'm like, obviously I can't see crap. So, and then, brain fog happens, and then my attention span, forget about it. But yes, it's much needed, and it has made my life so much easier. So yes, much needed.
And I'm really glad that, mind you guys, I came to ask Chubi. I came to ask Annie, was it last night? I was like, hey, could we use some of your content to share? Because I was like, it's like last minute to be like, hey, can you pop on? And they were like, yeah, I'm available. I was like, yes.
We got
talk about accessibility. Yeah. That's my jam.
Because honestly, and Chubi and I live for it. We love having guests, especially when it's about a topic that we care about, we want to learn more about. We obviously do research going into this, but this is something where we are allies, right? More than anything. I mean, so I know that you benefit so much from it, but for me, I'm like, I definitely want to learn, because I do have people in my world that this is important to them, and I see their struggles. So, but I am not one who can speak with knowledge or experience of it. So I feel it's like, please, person who knows, say what you know. And I'm so grateful that you came on today, and I did learn so much.
I
So
know.
much.
It's like,
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
it's the same.
And like I said, I follow all of your content.
Mm.
So I've been watching, and we're gonna share those videos that we talked about. And so let's just get some final thoughts from
Well,
the
before
three
we
of us.
get to that, let me tell you, when she says you were on, I was so excited. I'm like, let me see, research, all everything I could possibly intake in like 3 hours,
She
4
was
hours.
like, "So who are they? Let me see." And I was like, "She's right here." And I sent over your handle, and she was like, "Oh wow, yeah, okay, I'm excited. I'm excited."
And the thing is, we have a couple of episodes already about ableism, invisible battles, because we named one of those. Also, me talking about my invisible illness that obviously you invisible for a reason. And we do have a lot of other topics we wanted to talk about, and this one is obviously important. I mean, like every other topic we're going to talk about, but and very excited. I was like, okay, we're good. Okay,
And a lot of our episodes kind of tie one into the other, and it just so happens they kind of resurface. You talked about when you were younger and hadn't been diagnosed, and you were going through all those things. We definitely talked about that in Invisible Struggle. I just feel that a lot of also the ableist rhetoric has to do with, if you don't understand a certain feeling, you just call it laziness, or you call it something else, right?
Sure.
You
I mean, like,
don't take the
lazy
time.
is like ableism, period. Like I have
Yeah.
a whole video on that about like how and it's, I think that it's debatable. I've had someone like disagree with what I'm about to say, but like I feel like lazy is trying to be a word that means someone who like actively refuses to be like a contributor in a certain environment. For example, like in a household, someone who just like will literally feel a certain entitlement or power to have other people contribute labor, but they refuse to.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what the word lazy is trying to describe, but then it gets abused for and used against actual disabled folks. And the reason why that can be kind of a blurry or gray area is because there's no way to actually tell, right? We can make this assumption that someone is refusing to be a contributor, but oftentimes like they're just not going to communicate their disabilities. Oftentimes they're just like, or they don't know about their disabilities and don't actually even have the language to communicate. And sometimes they can just look like the asshole who doesn't want to, and who feels an entitlement and a power. I even had friends who were like very intentionally were in the closet about their disabilities. Like they have invisible disabilities and like don't want to out themselves as disabled, don't want to talk about their chronic pain. And so they will look like the asshole. They will refuse to go into a club or a bar if there's no seating available. But they will order the VIP bottle service just to get a seat so they don't have to be standing up in their pain. But they won't tell anybody that they're in pain. Just like, it's very like diva and like, yeah, a bottle service, I need the table, and it will come off the way. And they'd rather
way to cope. It's been their way to cope in a society that tells them that you have to about it.
Mm-hmm. So it's tough. It's tough. It's tough to, even though you want to make a word that condemns this like entitlement and power imbalance, that word is just way too easily abused and used in an ableist way. so that's really tough. And like, yeah, I have a whole video on that topic of like, well, I have two, I think, at least. One that talks about how people mock the as seen on TV products that like, they're like, oh, what kind of a lazy person needs a little clipper to get their socks on? What kind of a lazy person needs like cups already filled with fruit? Why can't you make the fruit cup yourself? Oh my God, pre-peeled oranges. Why can't you peel the oranges yourself? I'm like, you can't take a moment to consider that somebody might not be able to cut oranges themselves. You can't take a moment to think about the fact that somebody has difficulty putting on their own socks. And then they'll blame their ignorance on like the ad and being like, well, the ad doesn't show me disabled people. I was like, how do you know? How do you know that the people in the ad are not disabled?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because they look young, okay? Young people could be disabled too.
Look like, yeah.
So like, I'll have like, I definitely have like one video on specifically on the items, and then one video on the phenomenon of like how people use the word lazy and how it affects like, especially like chronically ill people and younger people who are like literally abused with language like that and with like concepts like that like you're young and you should be able to like do everything and you should be taking care of your elders and all these things. Like, youth has nothing to do with my physical capacity and my ability, my physical ability to do things. And my appearance, definitely not. With that. My appearance, definitely not. And I understand to a certain extent that ambulatory wheelchair users like myself are confusing as heck for a lot of people. And that's a big representation problem, because like every time on TV and in the movies you see a wheelchair user stand up and it's met with like a dramatic dun dun dun, and they were faking it this whole time. But we never, like in the United States, I know there's like one show in the United Kingdom with an actress who has EDS, who's ambulatory, and she gets up and down. I think it's like a novella over there. But in the United States, for sure, we don't like ever see ambulatory wheelchair users, like someone who like maybe can walk around their house, okay, but they need a wheelchair to walk their dog, like myself. And because that's something that like so few people know about, I have to live in anxiety all the time that like if I walk out to because I have a house with the driveway right, like if I remove my wall, my car is 3 feet away from this wall. The driveway is right next to my window. So if I need to like go to my driveway to get something out of my car, I don't even need a cane to do it, because it will only take me like a few steps to get to my car and back into my house. But the terror that I feel doing that a neighbor is going to see me like walk to my car, no problem. And then a neighbor might see me use my wheelchair to walk my dog, and like what they're going to think and what they're going to say and what they might do. Because people react violently to that kind of thing. There's like our society has this weird fixation on like, someone took me for a fool, which is also ableism. Someone was trying to make a fool out of me. It's an ableism trigger. You mentioned that already too, that like you don't have to be disabled to experience ableism. And people cannot stand to like have like intellectual ableism put on them, or like being called a fool, or any kind of like ableist word like dumb or crazy or whatever. And so stuff like disability fakers, or even like transgender people are another example of that same thing, where like people are like, oh, you tried to trick me, right? And it like triggers this, like, if they really examine themselves and internalize ableism, because like they're this idea of like you're trying to fool me is intellectual ableism. It's like not wanting to be called dumb. And they can react so violently. I've had stories told to me about how like especially at theme parks, that like they need a wheelchair to get around the park, but are able to like transfer into a ride and back into their wheelchair walking.
Mhm.
And a family one time, there was a young boy who came up to a friend of mine and kicked her in the legs while she was sitting in her wheelchair. And the father said to the son, "Good job, serves her right for faking."
The ignorance, I can't even.
Okay, like and
Oh, fuck that.
I've had my own like little weird altercations with that too. Nothing as severe as like physical violence as of yet, but that is like an anxiety that I definitely experienced. I'm like, one day someone's gonna mess with me, and there's like two options. My adrenaline could like spike up, and I might be able to fight back. Also, I have EDS and fragile joints, and might not be able to fight back. So there's like
Right.
two possibilities, and they're both terrifying because I don't want to be in a physical altercation with anybody.
It's exactly what you're saying, of like that idea of not wanting to look dumb or whatever the case may be. So instead of saying, "Oh, I didn't realize that that was a possibility," or "I didn't know that," explain it. They'd rather get upset and just feel
Right.
the blame, because the blame is easier.
Sure. I mean, hopefully they would Google it. Like, do ambulatory wheelchair users exist? Instead of like, explain to me why you use a wheelchair and you can still stand up and get into the roller coaster.
But would they even know that language, right?
Right.
So, which is something
that all comes right back down to
identifiers. Like identifiers, sometimes it's a little too much, and sometimes they're really necessary because sometimes people just don't have the language.
Well, yeah. So ambulatory is like a play on the word ambulate, which ambulate means to like walk. So ambulatory, ambulate, and I guess that's not in everybody's like vocabulary toolbox. And again, the big trigger to like our entire ableist system of oppression, where we are segregated, and those kinds of things are unknown to the masses, are unknown to like the average person.
Right.
Like I said, like I've had my own experiences with that, and like not as violent. I remember like literally just for laughing. Like I wasn't even ambulating. I was being pushed in my wheelchair by a friend at the theme park, and he was talking to me, and he told me something funny, and I laughed. And then a man really quickly like bent down as we passed him, and he mocked me and said, "Ha ha ha." And like in a few minutes, "You guys are going to trade places, right?" Like that. And like just kept going. And it was happened so fast that the person pushing me in the wheelchair didn't even hear it. But I was just like, for laughing, he thinks I'm faking, because wheelchair users are supposed to be looking down and miserable the entire time that they're using a wheelchair. But for laughing specifically, he's like, "Oh, they're faking using the wheelchair. They're fooling around, and they're probably going to like switch it up later, and the other person's going to get to ride the chair." I mean, it's sad more than anything else. And I'm in a weird middle place of like, I try to have compassion again, and like not condemn individuals for like something that's not really their fault, right? Like you just said, like they can't look up ambulatory wheelchair user if they'd like never heard of the word before. Like the only thing that maybe they could look up is like, why would someone use a wheelchair if they can walk?
Right.
And there's stuff if you look that up. Like they're still gonna find information if you look that up, but they have to want to look that up. Instead, they make assumptions.
We always talk about being investigators. Be investigators of your world. For too long, we've become complacent with the idea of like, we know what we know, and that's it. That's all we got to know.
Exactly.
But it's very obvious that it's not enough to just know what you know. There's too much going on in the world to be blind to it all, and like not take the time to look into it.
That's why we always urge everybody who's watching the show, everybody, I don't care who you are, go educate yourself on something. Oh, I don't know this. Oh, if you just heard it passing by, "Oh, what is that?" But then again, not everybody has that urge or the need to want to learn something. Oh,
Yeah.
whatever. And then they just don't care. Essentially, at the end of the day, it's like, it's not gonna affect me, or I heard it, and then that's it.
Yeah, it's toughy. That's individualism versus collectivism, which
Exactly.
it's
The
just
collective
perpetuated.
conscious, I say.
It's perpetuated all over the place. The pandemic
Yeah.
was affected really greatly by just exactly that, by individualism versus collectivism. Like people who are like, well, COVID is not going to affect me, so I don't care. I don't want to wear a mask. I don't, so on and so forth. So basically, they only care about them. Also, they very ignorantly think that it couldn't affect them, but that's a whole nother topic. But they assume that it wouldn't affect them, so they don't have to care at all. Versus like people who are existing right now to this day, like trying to plug like 15 holes with 2 hands, like keeping the house from flooding. In efforts for collectivism and efforts to like try to protect the public health. And that's been so disheartening to watch. And I think that's what I was talking about before, is like the mental health impact of 2020. Yeah. It's been very discouraging to like come to be confronted in that kind of divide, and people like being very selfish, and which perfectly ties into what we're talking about with accessibility, is like people who it doesn't affect them, so they have zero interest in like creating accessibility or accommodations, and in their minds creating accessibility is some kind of like special treatment for people and not an equality. So that is individualism versus collectivism. And I don't know, I feel very like, whenever I think about that, I get a little stuck. I'm like, it's not likely that just by having conversations you're going to convert anybody to change their philosophies.
Right.
But I also like to keep the hope alive that like by having these conversations, you do kind of open someone's eyes to see that they're not living alone on this planet, and that they should watch their actions and not hurt people or exclude people just because they have the privilege of never having had experienced those kinds of exclusions or discriminations.
Yes.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're always trying to do with this topic we pick.
This has been so beautiful. It literally, we say this like the last 4 or 5 the whole 5 seasons. So I'm like, you see, it's not just us.
Exactly.
It's real. And I know it's real because a lot of we have wonderful followers and supporters that they believe this and they share it. And so I'm so glad. Oh, this was such a nice episode.
So I already said thank you, but I'm going to say it again. Thank you so much. And to everyone who's watching, I hope you all learned something from today. It's going to be posted on Wednesday. If you didn't make it, it's okay. But we urge you, my final words is that we always urge you guys to read, to educate yourself, and to remember, what do you say, Vanessa? We're not an island. Everybody,
we're not an island.
We're connected in all the ways possible. It's a ripple effect. What you think is not going to affect you will. And, indirectly, it was just still going to affect you or somebody you know. And don't judge people. You don't know what they're going through. Like you can't judge a book by its cover. You don't know what someone is going through in their everyday, and just be respectful. Don't be an asshole. Just mind your own business, basically, in some way that you don't know. Just please, But
do no harm. Do no harm at the end of the day.
Exactly. Do no harm. So
there is no shame in learning. There is no shame in not knowing and then going to learn. I'm glad that we've done this episode. I'm glad we've talked about all of these things because it starts with understanding the individuals before we can fix the bigger problem. It's all born of these perpetuated concepts, right? That were placed in the way back whens and that we've kept around far too long. And it's the shift is happening, and it's up to us, y'all. It's not gonna happen by osmosis.
One topic at a time.
Yeah. Yep. So I wish you all good night. Stay fearless, fam.
Stay fearless, everybody.